Hey there, history buffs, and welcome to this episode of the History from the Homestead podcast. I am your host, Thomas Carroll, and joining me today is Mr. Scott Grant. Scott, welcome.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here. I love doing these things, and um, I'm happy to be here today. Uh, just kind of said, tell a little bit about myself. I have a full-time job as an asset manager. I own a company called Standfast Asset Management, but I do a lot of history um, and write a lot of history as sort of a sideline. And the topic that I'm best known for is the sinking of the SS GulfAmerica here in Jacksonville, Florida, off the coast of Jacksonville Beach on a Friday night. And I've given that speech like 300 times, and I've written multiple newspaper and magazine articles about that topic.
Well, you already introduced the topic, which we are talking about the Gulf America sinking, which occurred on April 11th of 1942. Um, so we'll talk. When you think of U-boats in World War II, you think of the North Atlantic convoys and stuff, but I don't think a lot of people realize how frequently the U-boats would prowl our coast, even up into the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, they go into the Gulf, and when I first start doing this, I go out to Houma, Louisiana, and there was a guy out there was a real submarine buff, German submarine buff, and in fact, his license plate was U-boat, which seems kind of strange, but that was his thing. And he had written some stuff about some sinkings in the Gulf. So yes, the German submarines come to the Gulf. Um, the initial operation is called Operation Drumbeat, and the Germans shortly before Christmas of 1941, they sent 5 submarines to the east coast of the United States, including the U-123, which is the submarine, our submarine, the submarine that comes to Jacksonville later. And the Germans were just extremely successful. We were woefully unprepared for the submarines. And so the Germans have a field day. They sink something like 245 ships in the first 7 months of 1942, including over or roughly a quarter of our tanker fleet. Um, and that number is more than one a day. And that's the number that often shocks people. More than one ship a day is going down off the East Coast, and the Navy and the U.S. government are anxious to keep that information away from the public. They don't want the public to know that we're losing that many ships.
Oh, certainly, that's understandable because we think these U-boat captains have been at it since 1938. By even April of 42, we had only been in the war a few months.
Yeah, we didn't know what we
And
were, and we frankly didn't have enough personnel to man the destroyers that we had, and we were using those destroyers. We were gearing up to fight the Japanese in the Pacific. We were trying to help the British with the convoys, and the East Coast no, was the Eastern Sea frontier was left largely unguarded until after this event that we're going to talk about.
so, well, we might as well dive into it, which was, as we said, the sinking of the Gulf of America right off of Jacksonville Beach, a mere, what, 5 miles?
Yeah, roughly 5 miles.
And, that's quite a front row seat to have. You think 5 miles out across is not far for what happened.
No, not at all. I mean, people could see what was going on. They probably could not, at least most of them could not see clearly what was going on, but they could see a lot of the action. They certainly saw the explosion um, from the torpedo hit, and that sort of yellowish orange mushroom cloud leaps 500 feet into the air. So yeah, they were aware. People on the beach, and earlier you said April 11th. It's actually April 10th here in the United States. Um, it's April 11th in the German U-boat logbook, because it was 4 in the morning, 4:24 in the morning, German wartime. And so on April 11th, but that would have been um, here in the United States would have been 10:24 our wartime. But my research has led me to believe that Jacksonville Beach had not adopted daylight savings time at that point. So for all intents and purposes, they thought it was 9:24, and they were acting like it was 9:24. So they definitely saw, initially they thought it was a maybe like an accident out to sea, and then when Hartigan, who's the commander of the U-boat is Reinhard Hartigan. He's a famous U-boat commander. The U-boat itself was the U-123, but when the people on the shore saw the outline of the U-boat, they do in fact finally realize what's happening, and they're horrified.
Yeah, and and the unfortunate maybe at the time, in the evening when it's dark, and Jacksonville at the time was not under blackout, which is kind of interesting. They had a lot of trouble yet getting cities blacked out yet, and that sort of illuminated the tanker, from what I understand.
Yeah, actually, you're absolutely right. There were no blackouts at all on the East Coast of the United States. Um, Florida is the first state to institute a blackout, and uh, they do that on April 11th, the very next day. They institute a brownout or a blackout, and they begin to require people to cover their windows, because there is this fear that the Germans used the lights, and they did use the lights from the shore to catch the U-boat.
Yeah, and
And here's just, I don't know if we got this up there now, but I'm screen sharing the same screen I initially shared.
oh
Uh,
yeah,
this is this is a telegram from a local attorney named Phil May, who worked in Jacksonville and was pretty well known, to General Blanding, and General Blanding was the military advisor to Governor Spessard Holland. And it says, 2 American ships were destroyed off the coast opposite Jacksonville Beach Friday night. It is reasonable to assume the submarine was aided by the lights of the amusement concessions. Is it not desirable to protect ships using this vital lane from that danger? Phil May. And this telegram was lost. We discovered it early on when I was doing my research in the Florida State Historical Archives.
wow, and I'd never seen that before until you showed it to me
So they were
beforehand.
aware, and it's interesting. They say the amusements. It's worth pointing out, when this happened, there were people on the Ferris wheel. There were people riding the roller coaster. There were people walking up and down the boardwalk. Cars were driving up and down the beach. People were dancing on the pier, and people were dancing on some of the hotel tops. So there, Jacksonville Beach was definitely open for business. Um, a lot of naval and military personnel were being assembled there, as well as sort of the normal local traffic.
Yeah, little known to them what was lurking just under the waves out there.
Right? They have no idea.
Um, and it's worth mentioning that after the torpedoing, that the U-boat captain had actually moved his submarine between the beach and the tanker to you know not inflict any extra casualties than necessary, which is admirable. Which kind of weird to hear from a lot of Nazis aren't known for being you know conscientious, for lack of a
After
better word.
after the torpedo hits, Hartigan brings his submarine in between the burning wreck and the shore. And when he does so, he shells the Gulf of America is listing hard to starboard. They're headed north on their maiden voyage from Port Arthur, Texas, to New York City. They're laden with 90,000 barrels of kerosene. So when the torpedo hits, that thing goes up like a torch. Um, the Gulf of America begins to list hard to starboard and to go down by the stern. And Hardigan then brings his submarine around the stern of the Gulf of America and places himself about 200 yards closer to the shore than the ship. And he begins to shell the keel of the Gulf of America with his 10.5 centimeter deck gun. At the same time, his crew opens up with the machine guns to take out the radio antenna so that Gulf America cannot send a distress signal. Now, it's a quaint story, and it's still it's been passed along, and you can find it online. And Michael Gannon, who was a professor of history at the University of Florida, wrote a book about this whole campaign that kind of concentrates on Hardigan, called Operation Drumbeat. And they talk about Hardigan taking himself to the landward side in order to protect innocent lives on shore. I'm not sure that that's true. I'm not sure that's the reason he did it. It was standard operating procedure to go to the side where the keel was showing and to shell that side of the ship because they wanted to break the keel. It's interesting, weird little facts. The Germans didn't count a ship as sunk unless it permanently went down. So if it was later raised, it was only damaged. We didn't count as a sinking. This was the fourth ship that Hardigan had sunk in 3 days. They'd sunk 2 oil tankers off the coast of Brunswick, Georgia in the course of 45 minutes on April the 8th. And then on April the 9th, he sank a refrigerated banana boat off of St. Mary's, Florida. And then on the 10th, he sinks the Gulf of America. And he goes to the landward side all 4 times. Wind was blowing out that night. So that was the second reason that the landward side was safer. And then I honestly think that more than anything, Hardigan wanted to put on a display. And in fact, in his logbook, he says that's the only thing he says about going to the landward side. We put on quite a display for the tourists tonight.
Interesting.
Now, the story about shelling, that comes out in a book called Aufgefechtsstationen, which was ghostwritten for Hardigan during World War II. And it's an interesting book because it was a very, very popular book in Germany during World War II. In fact, for a time, it was the second best-selling book in Nazi Germany, behind Mein Kampf. And the ghostwriter tells that story about not wanting to hit people on shore 5 miles away. I've never liked that story. I believe that the ghostwriter came up with it. Late in life, I communicated with Hardigan through his son and asked some questions, including that question. And the response was that not everything in the book was true.
I see. I see. Now, in doing so, he sort of put himself in a bad spot.
He was in a dangerous spot, but he was confident. He
Yeah.
knew that there was nothing in the area that was large enough, fast enough, or powerful enough to give him any trouble.
Curiosity, because this one I don't know. Do we know approximately how deep the water was there?
About 50 feet.
So yeah, that definitely doesn't leave a lot of dive room for a submarine whose, periscope will still stick out of the water at 20 some foot deep.
He what they would do is during the daytime they would put themselves on the sandy bottom and they would wait until night and they would hunt at night. When they leave the Gulf of America, they head south back towards St. Augustine, and they had been chasing they had chased the Gulf of America for about 45 minutes up the coast prior to launching their torpedo. Um, they headed south and they actually run into a U.S. destroyer, and they're on the surface. One of the things that people think is that these submarines are traveling around underwater. Uh, for the most part, they're not. They're on the surface. They only go underwater to hide. But he dives, and the destroyer, which was out of Miami and was headed north to Brunswick to investigate the sinkings from 2 nights earlier, goes pretty much right on top of him, drops some depth charges, and Hartigan says that he was preparing to abandon ship. He figured he was done for, but the U.S. destroyer, for reasons that nobody knows, just kept going. They dropped a couple depth charges and then just kept going.
Interesting. And you know, this is a little bit off topic, but was he not the one also that had at some point in time had viewed New York City through, binoculars off the
Yeah,
coast of New York City? I thought he was the same one.
he's the same guy, and as I say, he's a fairly famous uh, submarine commander, and it's a fairly famous submarine. But he first gets famous for uh, he's known as the man who saw New York in Germany. Uh, they would put up a picture in the newspapers and the magazines of sort of a blurry outline of New York City. But it's not that they take a picture. They do take a picture from the submarine, but it's all you can see is from that picture is just sort of blurry lights off in the distance. But yes, he he goes in. This is during the first mission. So they arrive in early January off the coast of Long Island. Hartigan starts the campaign. He's in command. It's called Group Hartigan. There's 5 submarines, and he takes his submarine using a tourist map into the right outside New York Harbor, and he's waiting there, hoping a ship will come by, and preferably an oil tanker, but a big ship, and that he can sink this ship within sight of New York City. Um, so I mean, Jacksonville's not his first attempt at a really high profile sinking. Ultimately,
Uh,
he ends up sinking a British oil tanker that same night off of Coney Island.
oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, that's definitely a good propaganda piece for them.
Yeah,
Which,
and part of their orders were if they had the opportunity to create terror, they were to create terror, and so Hartigan was following orders in Jacksonville, in my opinion.
oh yeah, I mean, definitely. Which we'll go back to the Gulf Americas. We kind of went off track because I was more curious than anything. But how long did it take the Gulf America to sink? Because it seems to me it was rather quick.
It actually the bow bobs on the surface for 6 days.
Wow, well, more or less because it probably hit the bottom and was sticking
Right.
up.
Yep. Beyond that, the ship goes down pretty quickly, and it's not um, it's not pleasant. It's panic and chaos on the Gulf of America itself. Once Hartigan opens up with the deck guns and the machine guns, those guys are convinced the Germans are just trying to kill them, and so they jump into the ocean, which is on fire. Lifeboat number 2 capsizes, and as a result, 19 guys die.
And I mean, I'm sure it was chaos because these guys are not, they're not the Navy. They're merchant marines who aren't to be fighting wars. That's not what they were trying to do. They were just merchant marines.
Right.
So, and I think most of them wasn't
Now,
it.
there, just a an aside here. Here we go. So, there are only two existing pictures of the Gulf America. This one was well known and obviously was taken by an airplane at some point after the sinking. But that, as you can see, the bow of the ship is still um, floating.
Yeah. And let's, maybe we'll have a little, this ship is 445 feet long. So it's
Oh no,
nearly a football field and a half long.
right.
So that's not a small ship.
This was a fairly large oil tanker. She was brand new, and no doubt the stern of this vessel is sitting on the ground, is sitting on the bottom. Um, what fascinates me is that 6 days, and this is the only picture we have. Now, I found another picture of the Gulf of America during my research when she's new, but that's it. Um, I always thought I'd find more pictures on it, honestly.
That's interesting. Now I'm presuming, by the picture there that the torpedo, I would say, probably hit towards the stern.
Yep.
And that would allow the air, almost an air bubble, to settle into the bow to keep it up.
And Hardigan had been chasing this thing for 45 minutes up the coast. So when he launches his torpedo, he's he's a couple miles behind the ship, and probably should not have launched a torpedo at that radical angle from that distance, which sort of also leads to the conclusion that, for whatever reason, he wanted this to happen right there in front of a audience.
Yeah. And I'm trying to look here. It was common for ships then to zigzag. They would not travel straight line. They would zigzag on various angles
The
to.
Gulf of America had a escort until she got to Cape Canaveral. And then she began to run a zigzag course until she was, give or take, 5 to 10 miles south of um, Jacksonville Beach. And at that point, she began to run parallel to the coast. Um, Nobody knows why she stopped zigzagging, but the presumption is that as she neared Jacksonville and Mayport Naval Base, which was in the mouth of the St. Johns River, um, that she felt safe. What submarine was going to attack, 5 to 10 miles from a naval base.
Well, and from other books and such I've read, the zigzagging really wasn't a super effective method for staving off a submarine's attack anyway. A little bit, but they weren't as effective as thought.
Okay.
And that comes from little off topic, but from the USS Indianapolis sinking.
Okay.
That it was another one. They weren't zigzagging when they were sank. Which interesting, they were sank at the end of the war, and
Yeah, that thing's a tragedy.
and
And a pretty well known one, but yeah.
and that came up in the court martial that if had it been zigzagging or not, it wouldn't have made a difference.
Oh, interesting.
So it's that may have been effective in say World War I, but with radar and technology, it didn't work out as well.
That I had not heard, so I learned. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
You mentioned the escort. What kind of escort did it have? Because I did not know it was escorted at all.
It was escorted through the Florida Straits and then up partially up the coast. Um, I kind of forget. Sorry, I kind of want to
It's
say it was a Coast Guard vessel and not a Navy vessel.
it's that's okay because I'm looking and it's just it says anything I've read says nothing about it. I know the survivors were rescued by the Coast Guard as well, but it does not say anything about them
There weren't many ships in Mayport at that time. There were two Coast Guard cutters that had been converted to Navy use. There was a yacht, um, and those were the three vessels that go out, as well as an undetermined amount of like lifeboats from the shore. People on shore. We don't know how many. We know some got into lifeboats and at least one case of like a dinghy and went rowing out to try and help.
Well, well,
They weren't
that
much help.
no, very very brave, but as you said, especially with this ship is surrounded by burning kerosene in the water because you know the kerosene will like oil will float and burn. It's very brave of them, but I would almost wonder if they weren't more in the way than anything.
Well, it turns out that at least one of the stories they are sort of in the way. The guy. Well, two of the stories. One is the Navy guys or Coast Guard guys pull them out of, and it was a Coast Guard ship, but it was the Navy. Um, they pull them out of the water and they kind of admonish them, what are you guys doing here? The other story that appears in the paper, and there were not a lot of stories in the newspaper about this event because of censorship, Navy censorship. Uh, but the Navy says they discover a guy the next day, 10 miles out to sea, and they rescue him in a dinghy. I always wondered if that was a made up story, but I've since found a substantial amount of corroborating evidence that the person in the that there was a person, that he went out in the dinghy, that he was on his honeymoon, and his wife was mad.
I understandably so, understandably so.
And he comes back, viciously sunburned because he's out there a good portion of the next day.
I could feel them. If I stay out in the sun like that, I'll get viciously sunburned as well.
Me too.
Um, now, I think it's interesting, to talk about Hardigan too, and what his job was after the war, because he survived the war. Uh, as we said, he lived to be 105, but after the war, he got into oil and everything, and worked for the company that owned the ship that he sank.
Um, yeah, he works um, with Texaco, and he is sinks the SS Oklahoma was one of the two ships he sinks on April the 8th, 1942, off of Brunswick. And that was a Texaco ship. The GulfAmerica was a Gulf ship. He may have worked with Gulf as well. He basically starts his business after the war by carting around buckets of heating oil and selling them door to door, and eventually becomes quite wealthy. And serves as a member of sort of like the like a state legislator for his district. He was from Bremen, Germany, and he's a member of their uh, Bundestag or whatever they call it.
Yeah, and I can picture now people who are think I'm uplifting a Nazi, which I don't want anybody to think that. So I want to add a disclaimer to that. He was just a captain who was doing his job because most of those that were in the Kriegsmarine were known to be less than Nazi anyway. They were more sailors and psychopaths.
Hartigan claims that he was never a Nazi. He does meet Adolf Hitler after this event. I mean, he goes back to Germany. He's a hero. He's a huge hero, and he never goes back to sea. He's too valuable. So they take him around to war plants, and he gives speeches and he signs copies of his book, and he's a morale booster. He claims that when he meets Hitler, he tells Hitler that he thinks too much about the ground, and he should build more airplanes and more submarines.
Interesting.
I don't know if that's true or not, but that was a claim.
Yeah, I don't know. Um,
But this story, you make an interesting point. This story has always been a story about Hardigan. And when I start telling the story, I'm just another guy telling the Hardigan story. Um, as I did more research and got more comfortable with all the facts, I also began to realize that it should also be a story about the guys that 19 guys die
yeah,
on the Gulf America. 19 brave Americans die 5 miles off the coast of the United States. I like to say that no Americans died by an act of war um, any closer to the United States than these 19 guys that died in the Gulf of America, with the exception of the family in, I think it's Oregon, that dies from the Japanese balloon bomb.
yes, yeah, and that you make a good point. It should be looked at that way. It should be looked at both sides because these were just guys who were doing their job as well, transporting kerosene to, I believe you said New York City, I believe, but that was their job. And unfortunately, they became a part of war because the kerosene was needed for the war effort and everything. And
Yeah. And the other thing was that this was a dangerous job. This is one of the most dangerous jobs in World War II for an American. Was doing the being in the Merchant Marine. Uh, Over 9,000 guys die. Um, Roughly 3,200 of those die in the first 7 months of 1942.
yeah, yeah, that I mean, you figure the merchant ships, they're not outfitted for war. Some of them had rudimentary you know armaments on them, but they're not designed for war. They're designed to move as much product as possible, and they weren't fast either. They were most merchant ships were rather slow, sitting ducks.
Yeah. Um, the Gulf America was doing about 12 and a half knots. Um, they actually had a deck gun and a machine gun, and they had 5 naval personnel on board to operate those. But they never returned fire. The ship went down too fast. All they did was, try and get off the ship once they were
Yeah,
hit.
I'm sure they couldn't even see their target to begin with anyway. With the
It's a funny thing. There's an interview from the chief mechanic that says he couldn't never saw the submarine. Um, Yeah, we know the submarine was only a couple hundred yards away and was actively attacking him. And other personnel on the ship say um, that they thought the Germans were trying to kill him. So I don't understand why the one guy says he doesn't see anything, but that was his claim. Now again,
uh,
perhaps that was some propaganda, some censorship by the Navy for that
I,
newspaper.
yeah, yeah, who knows? It could very well be. Um, well, Scott, we're nearing towards the end of the show. Is there anything else you can think of that we missed? I think we
Well,
covered it fairly well, but you are the expert.
yeah, we talked about Hardigan, and I think uh, that's good. We talked about the Americans. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that we were able to install a memorial um, to those 19 guys that died, and uh, because of that, some of those guys' bodies were just lost, never recovered. And so we were able to put in a memorial plaque uh, in conjunction with the Daughters of the American Revolution um, to to remember those guys. I'm trying actually to call that up so I can put that up there. And that's in Jacksonville Beach, um, near the coast. Hmm. Oh, there we go. So there's a memorial marker, and in keeping with this idea that the real heroes that night were the guys that died. There's the list of the guys that died. Um, I was able to install this because I began to concentrate on one guy's story, and uh, Rhodes, um, oh Navy, yeah, William Glenn Rhodes. He was 18 years old. He was the first kid from his hometown in South Carolina to enlist. This was his first assignment. Was operating the deck gun on the GulfAmerica. Um, he's one of the guys that is thrown out of the lifeboat, and ultimately they pull him from the sea, and when they pull him from the sea, his burnt and blackened body, the skin literally peels off his arm, and he suffers for 36 hours in um, Mayport Naval Station before he finally succumbs to his wounds. And the family doesn't know this, that he had survived the initial attack for a period of time until they go to apply for his gravestone in 1945. And they submit this request for a gravestone, and they say he died on April the 10th, and the Navy crosses it out with a red ink pencil and says, no, he died April 12th. And that story, I began to tell that story, and the more I told that story, the more I would pitch for the idea that we should have a memorial. And I gave this speech, the Daughters of American Revolution, one day, told William Glenn Rhodes' story, and they came up afterwards and said, you know, we can build that memorial for you. That's what we do. And so there's a memorial finally installed. I think it says 2019, um, in remembering the true heroes of that night.
That's great. That's wonderful that you were able to help put that together and everybody could, because they deserve to be remembered. And
They do. And as I said, I mean, look, Hartigan's a fascinating figure. Dashing. He's very talented. Aggressive. His story's been told. And and I'm part of that, but it's not just about Hartigan. We shouldn't necessarily just be celebrating this German submarine commander, no matter how dashing and handsome he was. And actually, if we can, let me just see if I can pull up one picture of Hartigan as well, just
yeah,
so.
yeah, and
Um,
I'm sure plenty of those guys on the Gulf America were plenty dashing as well.
yeah, probably. There's not that. It's always surprising me. There's not that many pictures of a lot of these events. And bear with me. Just let me get this,
Sure,
and
sure.
I'll be done. Just want to find. Yeah, there we go. This is the one. I suspect that if I did this often enough, I could do this faster, but not to be. So there we go. There's Hartigan. And he looks a lot like who was the guy that played the commander in Das Boot? I mean, doesn't he look like that guy from Das
Oh,
Boot?
yeah, he does. When you pulled that up, that's what I was thinking. I can't think of his name, but I mean,
Uh,
yes, he looks very straight out of Hollywood.
I,
Um,
I've always believed, as I've gotten into the story more, that they to some extent they were attempting to replicate Hartigan, the look. Although a lot of those guys look like that, but there's Hartigan. Um, aboard the Gulf America, or aboard the U-123.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that looks like straight out of a Hollywood picture right there.
Hartigan was a celebrity. He was featured on magazines, newspapers, gave speeches, wrote books. He was a big celebrity in Germany. And even up until his death, there's still, he was one of the heroes of the German side, and he was not a Nazi. So
Yeah, that was kind of the point I wanted to make there briefly. That uh,
he claimed he was not a Nazi, and I believe that that's true. I don't think he
uh,
was a big fan of the Nazis.
I believe a lot of them weren't in all branches of their service. I believe.
And particularly the Navy. It's often pointed out that particularly in the Navy, these guys, and the same is true in the United States. I mean, the Navy guys think they're a little bit better than in the rest of the services. So there you go. So that's it. That's the story. I think we hit all the good points. Hopefully your audience will like it.
Oh, I believe they will. They have to. They have to like it. That's just the way it is. They're not allowed to dislike it. So, Scott, I thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this. It is an interesting story that needed to be remembered, and that's what we try to do here on the show.
I think it's a fantastic story. And at some points I had thoughts of trying to write something to sell to Hollywood. It's a good story. I suspect that it would not shock me to one day wake up and see somebody's making a movie about this. It's a because of the two things. One going to New York, and then two sinking the Gulf of
Yeah,
America. I mean, there's more to Hartigan. I mean, he sank a bunch of ships and was involved in some pretty intense naval battles. He sank a Q ship. He once sank 4 ships in a single night off the coast of Virginia. It goes on and on.
yeah, yeah. I think you could sell it. I think you should write. I have no idea how you write a script, so
Neither do I.
so. But yes, I thank you very much, Scott.
Hey, you're really welcome. It was great being on your podcast, and make sure I get a link to it, and I'll share it with my people.
Will do. Thank you.